My name is Rhonda Pierce, and I'm spokesperson for Smets Needles North America, and I'm delighted to be here with you today. I'm coming to you from the western suburbs of Chicago, where the sun is shining, but I'm sure it's not quite as warm as it is in your neck of the woods. So today we're going to talk about Smets needles. Yes. My talk will probably be about 45 minutes. I will have breaks between the 5 different parts of today's conversation. And if you have a question for me, well, go ahead and just put that in the chat room. I will try to monitor that as I talk, but sometimes I get so wrapped up in talking I forget to look. But Suzanne will be helping me out with that too. So let's talk about the parts of the needle. Because I think once you are aware of the parts of the needle and understand the functions, that sometimes it makes your needle selection a little bit easier. So when I was traveling, I was going to 20, 25 events each year. I would always travel with my Smets Super Demo Needle. And this is 17 inches tall, and my luggage when I was flying was always checked by TSA. But don't need to worry about that here today. So I do have my needle mounted on a wooden base here. So that's what this here is. So let's talk a little bit about the parts of the needle. At the very top of your needle is a beveled edge. Have you noticed that before? It's referred to as the butt of the needle. And this beveled edge allows easier needle insertion into the needle holder. So it's beveled for easier insertion into your needle holder. Our home sewing machines, 99% of all of our home sewing machines require a flat shank. A flat shank. I think you can probably see that. Since 2014, you may have noticed that Smets needles now have either 1 or 2 bands of color on this area here, which is referred to as the shoulder of the needle. And we'll talk about those color bands shortly. This area here is referred to as the blade of the needle, the blade. And the size of the needle is determined by the measurement of this area here of the needle. Along the length of the blade, have you noticed the groove? And I think you might be able to see it, the groove of the needle. And if you have a needle right there in front of you, you can actually see and feel the groove. And what's the purpose of the groove? Well, the groove is going to cradle your thread so it's not flip-flopping back and forth. The thread should move evenly and smoothly down the length of the needle to the eye. We have the point and the tip, and these change according to different needle types. We have the eye. And have you noticed on the back side of your needle is this indentation above the eye of the needle? This is referred to as the scarf of the needle, the scarf. What's so important about the scarf? Well, when your needle passes through your fabric and your throat plate, your bobbin hook has to come up and catch that top thread in order to create the stitch. So the bobbin hook actually needs passing room in order to create that stitch. So this little area here, this little indentation is referred to as the scarf of the needle. So those are your basic parts of the needle. Now I'm going to show you a screen. Okay, so here's a wonderful picture of the needle, and you can see easier the different parts, the butt, the shank, the shoulder, the blade, the groove, the eye, etc. I think one of the most important parts of the needle is the eye of the needle. The eye is often overlooked, except that you know that you have to thread the eye of the needle. But let's look at the eyes just a little bit closer. Your everyday needle, the universal needle, the eye is about 40% the width of the blade. But look at the embroidery needle eye. You can see that the eye is larger. And when you look at the top stitch in the metallic eyes, wow, you can see they're not only wider, but they're also elongated. So what does a larger eye mean to you when you're sewing? A larger eye means there's less stress on the thread as it's passing through the eye of the needle. So if you have a problem with threads that are breaking or shredding, then you either need to move up a needle size or you need to change to a needle type that has a larger eye. So I hope I've solved a problem for you that's common for all of us when sewing, and it has to do with the eye of the needle. Let's talk about the color bands on the needle. Your Smets needles will have either 1 or 2 bands of color that identify the needle type and size. These 2 bands went into effect in 2014. So let's look a little closer. On the left-hand side of this chart, you see that it's labeled needle type. And nearly all needle types are assigned a color. And that color is on the top band of your needle. So the top band of your needle identifies the needle type. On the right-hand side of this picture, you see the column is labeled as needle size, and a color is designated for each size. So the size of the needle is shown on the lower band of color on the actual needle. So what kind of needle do we have here in this sample? Yellow for stretch, and that lower band is a rose color, so that's size 7511. Let's just give a couple examples. My favorite needle type for piecing and quilting and actually all kinds of sewing is a Microtex size 8012. So that top band of color would be purple for Microtex, and for size 8012, it would be orange. One more example, if you had a Jersey 8012 needle, well, you'd have 2 bands of orange. Now, when you look at the left-hand column, the needle types, the very first needle type listed is universal, and it's X'd out. So no color is assigned to the universal needle. That means that universal needles will have only 1 band of color, and that's to identify the needle size. So if you have a universal size 8012 needle, then you'll just have that single band of orange for 8012. So any questions about the colors? Sandy's asking if she can get a copy of the PowerPoint. Well, Sandy, I've got something better than the PowerPoint, and I'll tell you about that later. And Suzanne has that for you too. We'll answer, so you'll have this information at your fingertips. All right, so next, let's move on. I want to make sure that you know how to read the needle pack. How many times have you looked at a needle pack and you thought, wow, there's lots of numbers and some letters on there. What does that all mean? Well, you'll always find the needle size right at the bottom of your needle pack. So on this little package of needles, we've got assorted sizes. We've got sizes 7010, 8012, and 9014. But how many of you know what the numbers are right above the needle size? That's referred to as your needle system. Needle system. 130/705H is the needle system. What that means, 130/705 means that your needle has a flat shank. A flat shank for perfect positioning into your needle holder. The H translates from a German word that means scarf. So needle system 130/705H is a flat shank needle with a scarf that 99% of all of our home sewing machines require. So don't be intimidated by that line. All right, we've got the needle type actually spelled out. And now that needles are color-coded, you can see the codes through the packaging. And since this is a universal pack, we know there's only one band of color to identify the needle size, or in this pack, sizes. So we've got 3 different colors of bands. So we've got green for size 70-10, we've got orange for 80-12, and we've got a blue band for size 90-14. So let's just look at another pack of needles, and I want to make sure you are familiar with all these numbers. So again, right at the very bottom of your package is the needle size. So we know this is a size 90-14. The needle system is above that. Needle system 130-705 means that it's a flat shank needle, H for scarf. But wow, there's another letter there. -E for embroidery. It could be a Q for quilting, could be an M for Microtex, or a J for jeans. So there's additional information on some of your little needle packs on the needle system line. Above that, again, we have the needle type spelled out. We've got the German word for needle, the Smets name, and again, now that needles are color-coded by needle type and size, we can see those color bands through the packaging. On this package here, the top band of color on these needles is red for embroidery and blue for size 90-14. So I hope that helps you understand the information on your needle package. There's actually redundant information on that little pack of needles. So I'd like to talk a little bit about different needle types. Needles used for piecing and quilting, needles for sewing with knits, etc. So let's start with sewing actually piecing and for quilting. So from all of my travels, I've done both formal and informal surveys. So the information has been quite consistent, and there are 5 needle types that are popular for piecing and for quilting. And I bet you can probably guess what the most popular needle type is. And that would be the universal needle. Actually, just like the name suggests, the universal needle is popular for all kinds of sewing and quilting. But I always like to say with Smets, you have options. So the universal's a great choice. It has a slightly rounded point, but wow, you've got options. So let's see what those other 4 options are for piecing and for quilting. The first one is the jeans needle, also known as a denim needle. Are you surprised to see this needle? Well, if you're sewing with flannels, or maybe you're making those heavier raggy quilts, you need a hardy needle. What's special about the jeans needle is that the jeans needle has a reinforced blade. A reinforced blade, so when the fabric penetrates through the fabric and past the throat plate, there's less stitch deflection. You get a cleaner stitch when the needle is passing through your fabric, especially those heavier fabrics. So the main feature of the jeans needle is that it has a reinforced blade for less stitch deflection, more accurate stitches. Jeans needle. Another needle type for piecing and quilting is the top stitch needle. The top stitch needle. This needle also has a slightly rounded point, but as we saw earlier, the main feature to the top stitch needle is the elongated eye. The elongated eye. So there's less stress on the thread as it's passing through the eye of the needle. People like to use the top stitch needle for both piecing and for quilting. Next, we have the quilting needle. The quilting needle, and just as the name suggests, it's frequently used for piecing and for quilting. What's special about the quilting needle is that it has a slightly rounded point, but it also has a special taper that was made specifically for piecing and for quilting. So the quilting needle has a special taper for your piecing and for quilting. Generally, the smaller size, 7511, is used for the actual piecing of your project, and the size 9014 is used for the quilting of your project. And then finally, we have the Microtext needle. The Microtext needle. This is my favorite needle for all kinds of sewing. What's special about the Microtext is that it has what's referred to as a very slim acute point. Very slim acute point. So with a very slim acute point, you're going to get the most precise stitches. If you're going to be doing fine work, you want a Microtext needle. It's great for piecing and for quilting and all kinds of sewing. You're going to get the most accurate stitch with the Microtext needle because it has a very slim acute point. The other thing about the Microtext needle, because it has a very slim acute point, the point is going to wear out quicker than any of your other needle types. So you're going to have to replace the Microtext needle more frequently than any of your other needle types. So that's your Microtext needle. So let's quickly review 5 needle types for piecing and for quilting. So first we have everybody's favorite, the workhorse of all sewing. We have the universal needle. We have the jeans needle that has that reinforced blade, so there's less stitch deflection when the stitch is created. It's great for sewing through, of course, denim, just like the name suggests, but flannels and any of your heavier fabrics. We've got the top stitch needle, which has that elongated eye. People like to use the top stitch for piecing and for quilting. We have the quilting needle, which has that special taper. The quilting needle was specifically made for piecing and for quilting. And then finally, we have the Microtex. And the generic name for Microtex is a sharp needle, And with the Microtex, with that very slim acute point, you're going to get the cleanest, most precise stitch. And the Microtex will wear out, it will dull quicker than any of your other needle types. So any questions on these 5 needle types for piecing and for quilting? Okay. Sandy, I think I'll go ahead and just take your question right now. Sandy is asking about the color banding, and is that universal with all the needle companies? And the answer is no. So the information I'm giving you here today is specific to Smets needles. There are other needle companies, and sometimes the entire shank is a single color. But Smets has either 1 or 2 bands of color on the shoulder of the needle to identify the needle type and size. So thank you. Thank you very much for asking that question. So Sandy, this leads right to our next section, and that's sewing with knits. I have to tell you that I've made many quilts. I started sewing many years ago, my own clothes for 4-H, etc. And just have always loved doing fashion sewing. And then I got the quilting bug, and wowza, I've made lots of quilts. And now what I'm seeing, or at least before the pandemic when I was visiting stores, I was starting to see knit fabrics in quilt shops and sewing machine dealers. So knit fabrics have really come a long way over the decades. So if you are an avid quilter and you haven't done any sewing with knit fabrics, or maybe it's been a long time, the knit fabrics today are exquisite. So you'll want to give those a try. And part of the success of working with knits is having the appropriate needle. So there are two needle types you need when sewing with knits. And the first is the jersey needle. The generic name for a jersey needle is a ballpoint needle. The jersey needle has a medium ball point. The other needle type that you need in your stash when sewing with knits is a stretch needle. The stretch needle. Now, the stretch needle also has a medium ball point. What's different between the jersey and the stretch? They both have a medium ball point, but the stretch needle has a narrower eye and a deeper scarf. And those two differences make a world of difference in how the needle reacts to your fabric and thread. So if you're sewing with knits, how do you know? Do you start with the jersey or do you start with the stretch needle? Well, the rule of thumb is if your fabric has lycra, spandex, or elastic, start with the stretch needle. Start with the stretch needle if your fabric has lycra, spandex, or elastic. If it's just a regular knit fabric, but it doesn't have that great deal of stretch, then start with the jersey needle. The jersey needle. Now here's the thing. Sometimes stretch and jersey needles are interchangeable, but not always. So if your fabric has lycra, spandex, or elastic, and you start with the stretch needle, and this has happened to me before, and you don't like the stitch quality, well, then just pull out the jersey needle, and that will probably work. Stretch and jersey are oftentimes interchangeable, but not always. So again, if you start with a jersey needle, but you don't like the stitch quality, well, then try the stretch needle. One of the two will probably work well for you. So I hope that helps you with your sewing with knits. I know you're in a warm environment, but I want to just touch upon Minky and Cuddle fabrics because those are really popular, stretchy fabrics that are growing and exploding in popularity. And the needle of choice when sewing with the Cuddle or the Polar Fleece, Minky is the stretch size 90-14, the stretch 90-14. So keep that in mind. You'll have better stitches. All right. Okay. Any questions about sewing with knits? Let me see. All right.
Sandy had asked about, I think you already answered it, what needle would you use? And she said Microtex. I'm going to say a definite no because Microtex is a sharp needle. Is that correct?
Right. The Microtex, the generic name for a Microtex is a sharp needle. So if you're working with a knit fabric, I think that's what the question was, I would probably won't get the best stitch with a Microtex. Now, I should also point out with the Microtex, you know how popular batiks are. The Microtex is also really popular for working with batiks because the batiks have, they're still overly dyed even after you wash them, and they're kind of tightly woven, and that Microtex, that very slim acute point just really slices right through the fabric easily, so you get a nice clean stitch. So Microtex for sewing with batiks.
And Kathy had asked how often to change that Microtex needle.
Oh, okay. Well, you know what? I'll answer that shortly.
We have a lot of questions coming in, but we'll get to them.
All right. So next I want to talk, needles don't really change that much. But what is new is, and I know that Suzanne carries these in her store, and that's the chrome needles, the Smets chrome needles. The formal name is Smets Chrome Professional Grade. There you go. I think you can see I've got a little reflection there. Smets Chrome Professional Grade. Don't let professional grade scare you from using these needles. Chrome is a wonderful finish. It's very smooth. It resists heat and wear. You get a really beautiful stitch when using the chrome. Currently, not all Smets needles are available in chrome. Right now, it's just the best-selling needles in the best-selling types or sizes. So I was a little suspicious at first when chromes first came out, so I tested a Smets chrome Microtex 8012 versus a regular nickel-coated Microtex 8012. And wow, I was really pleasantly surprised that really probably 80% of the time I could see that there was a better stitch that was made with the Microtex chrome needle. I could also hear the difference in the way the needle was penetrating through the fabric. It was just smoother. It wasn't as loud. So I'm really sold on the Smets chrome, and I encourage you to give these a try. So besides the needle, you'll notice that the packaging is very colorful, and the packaging is actually based on the Smets color chart. So just as the top band of color on your needle identifies the needle type, we've got a little color block here on the card, and this top triangle identifies the needle type. So purple for Microtex, and then the size is in the lower corner of the needle. So this seafoam green is a size 60/8. So just to show you, Microtex is available in 3 sizes. So the 60/8, we've got the emerald green for size 70/10, and we've got the orange for size 80/12. So you can just look through all these. Oh, I always like to show the jersey, because just like if you have the jersey size 80/12, you've got the 2 bands of orange color. So again, chrome is the premium Smets needle. It resists heat and wear, and also you probably get a little bit more sewing time out of your needle, although if you're sewing on top of pens, that does shorten the life of your needle. All right, so that is the Smets chrome that you're going to want to try. And those you find only in your specialty shops, such as Hip Stitch. Suzanne has a variety of the Smets chrome, so you're not going to find the chrome everywhere. The other needle that I want to bring to your attention is one that came out in 2019. You might not know about it yet. And that is the Smets Super Nonstick Needle, Super Nonstick Needle. So I think you can say even virtually that these needles are a different color. So they are a little bit of a charcoal color or kind of gunmetal color. And what is that? Well, that's the nonstick surface. I can't use the T word for Teflon, but it's a nonstick surface. What's that nonstick surface going to do? Yeah, it's going to resist all those things that gum up your needle. So there are 2 other important features to the Super Nonstick Needle, and that is that the needle has a reinforced blade. As we learned earlier, the reinforced blade gives you less stitch deflection, so you'll get a cleaner stitch. Also, on the Super Nonstick, the eye is extra large, an extra large eye. So the Super Nonstick currently come in sizes 70, 80, 90, and 100, just 4 sizes. So when are you going to use the Super Nonstick needle? Well, how many of you do machine embroidery? How many of you do machine applique? And you're working with those sticky stabilizers. And what happens to your needle? It has a tendency to gum up, right? Your needle gets hot and it gums up. So the nonstick surface is going to resist all those sticky stabilizers, the fusibles, the spray adhesives, etc. If you're sewing on vinyl, this is a great needle choice, because what happens when you sew on vinyl? Yeah, the vinyl gets hot and it has a tendency to hug your needle. Also, splash cloth or oil cloth, you'll want to use the super nonstick. So again, for machine embroidery and machine applique, you've got the nonstick surface, a reinforced blade, and an extra large eye. So these are really terrific, terrific needles. Okay, wow, the questions are coming in, so that's great. Let me go to the top here and let's see, Lisa, I'm having trouble with the needle choice when sewing art gallery fabrics, 200 count. Often the fabric feels stiff or I will break a needle. I use a Viking sapphire machine. Okay. I have not sewn on art gallery fabrics. Of course, I'm familiar with them. I love all of the designs that Pat does for her art gallery fabrics, but I don't recall that I've actually bought any. My needle of choice for art gallery fabrics would be a Microtex needle, a Microtex. I would use either a size 80-12 or a 70-10. Sometimes you kind of have to test what needle size to use. And speaking of size, oftentimes I'm asked, well, what needle size do I use? So I have my rule of thumb is my benchmark for needle size and thread is my everyday thread is a 40 weight thread. And I generally use an 80-12 needle. Now, sometimes I might have to shift down to a 70-10, but overall, probably 85% of the time for a 40 weight thread, I will use a 80-12 needle. If I'm using a finer thread, finer than a 40 weight, then I would go down to like a size 70, 75 or 70, etc. So again, using a benchmark of 80-12 for 40 weight thread, then if I'm using a heavier weight thread, then I'll move up to a size 90-14 or something heavier, depending on what weight of thread. Just to give you a real life example, I made a quilt through my local quilt shop. It was a quarterly, year-long project, and I used K-facet fabrics. I love those fabrics. And I didn't test ahead of time. I just jumped right in to sew my blocks together. I'm going, all right. So I was using, I was using a 50 weight thread. And I was using an 80-12 needle. And I'm thinking, this isn't working very well. I didn't really like the way my stitches were working out. And so I changed to a fresh needle, and the same thing. The fabric was kind of being pushed down into the throat plate. And I thought, well, that's weird. So it just so happens I have quite the stash of needles at home. So I pulled out a Microtex 70-10, and wow, sewed like butter. So sometimes you should have a stash of a variety of different needle types in sizes, because what you normally use may not always be the best. So you need to have alternatives, especially when you're sewing at, 1 o'clock in the morning. I will also just add that Smets works with all the different machine manufacturers. Our Smets engineers send samples and work with all the different manufacturers. So that's really great. You're not, you don't have to worry about Smets working with your machines. Okay. Is the color band, okay, I answered that one already. Which bright, any guides on how often? Oh, okay. Oh yeah, I'm going to come back to changing your needle. The only difference between top stitch and the quilting. Okay, so the difference between, Lisa's asking the difference between a top stitch and a quilting needle. So yes, the eyes are definitely different. The top stitch needle has that larger, elongated eye. And then the quilting needle has that, that tapered point. It's more a more severe point than the top stitch needle. So you've got a different stitch experience between those two needles, so you can kind of experiment. Becky's asking again about the difference between the jersey and the stretch needles. All right. So both the jersey and the stretch needles have a medium ball point, The difference is that the stretch needle has a narrower eye and also a deeper scarf. And that deeper scarf allows the bobbin hook to get just a little bit closer to the needle in order to complete the stitch. And that makes all the difference in the world when you're sewing with your stretchy fabrics, have lycra, spandex, or elastic. So again, the stretch needle has a medium ballpoint, a narrower eye, and a deeper scarf. Thanks for asking that, Becky.
Rhonda, I have a kind of a follow-up to that because I am a big sewer on knits.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So my guess is that, because I have had some issues with the stitches skipping depending on, using the wrong needle. And my guess is that you have a narrower eye with a stretch needle because those fabrics are so much tighter if you have a lycra or elastic in them. I guess, is that true? Because they're much tighter.
You want that there needs to be less wiggle room for the thread in the eye of the needle. So that's what the stretch needle is all about, that narrower eye, and again that deeper scarf, so that needle hook can get a little bit closer to the needle to create the stitch. Yep. It's kind of an art, sewing with stretch fabric, and no two stretch fabrics are going to be alike. So the stitch experience is a little bit different for everyone. All right. Well, let me share my screen again. And because, what do you think the most popular question is? Well, you're asking it right there in the chat room. And that is, how often should I change my needle? Well, first of all, let me just be right up front with you. Needles do not last forever. Don't wait for the needles to break. And your needles, while you're using them, should never, ever look like these, because what are these points and tips going to do to your fabric? Yes, they're going to just destroy your fabric and leave holes and pucker and snag, etc. So you need to remember, whether you're a newbie or you're an advanced or a power sewer, the needle does not last forever. The needle is not a permanent machine part. And when you bring your machine in, because you might be having a little problem, what's the first thing the technician is going to ask you? Yeah, when's the last time you changed your needle? Well, lucky for us, changing the needle is something we can do on our own. You just get out that little screwdriver, or you flip that little hook in order to change the needle. It's something that you can do, and it's very inexpensive. So I want to show you this picture here because this is a used needle. When you look at some of your used needles, now this one here on the left-hand side looks sharp, right, to the naked eye? But when you look to the right-hand side, you see it's been magnified 1,000 times. Now, what's this needle going to do to your fabric? You can see how dull this needle is, and it's got that super lip, that super burr right on the very tip of your needle. And look at all those striations. So this needle is actually just going to shred up your fabric, definitely pucker, snag, etc. So you need to change out your needle. So yeah, needles get dull with use. And let me just stop. So What's the rule of thumb? Well, the rule of thumb for changing your needle is a needle lasts every 8 hours of sewing. But we know that's not true for everyone. I've had power quilters come up and say, really, Rhonda, 8 hours of sewing? Are you kidding me? I replace my needle every 4 to 5 hours of quilting or sewing. I know some people who even make garments, and they'll change their needle several times throughout the construction of the garment. For someone who's not an aggressive sewer, maybe you change your needle every 20 hours. So it depends on your project. It depends on how you sew. Are you aggressive, etc. So while you're sewing, what are clues that you need to change your needle? So take note of these clues to change your needle. What's the first clue? What's happening to your thread? Is your thread shredding and breaking? That's a clue. You need to change the needle. And I will just tell you that even when your threads are breaking and shredding, it's not always just about the point and the tip. But if you are not changing your needle frequently enough, the thread will actually create a groove right in the eye of the needle. And that groove will create burrs and shred and break your thread. So keep that in mind also, that your thread, if you're not changing your needle often enough, the thread can wear a groove into the eye of the needle, which is not good. So other clues to changing your needle. What's happening to your fabrics? Your fabric might be pulling or snagging. You might be leaving a big hole, or the fabric might be puckering. So that's a clue. What are you going to do? Change the needle. What's happening? You say, well, I'm sewing in a straight line. Why do my stitches look kind of wiggly squiggly? Hello, your needle is dull. What are you going to do? Change the needle. And your stitches might be skipping. That's another clue. Change the needle. And what about your machine? When you're sewing, you should be in that wonderful little bubble of joy, that sewing joy, right? You're just humming along. And then you start to hear that little click, click, clicking sound. You ignore it. And now it graduates to a pop, pop, popping sound. And if you ignore that, your machine is going clunk, clunk, clunk. Hello, replace your needle. Your needle is begging to be replaced. So replace the needle. So any questions about any of replacing the needle types, etc.?
Any way to sharpen a needle, Lisa asked.
Oh, how to sharpen a needle?
I'm guessing no, but.
Yeah, simple answer. Don't do it. Okay, and I don't mean to be flippant about that, but you might not realize that the needle is actually an engineered tool. And the same engineering principles that are used to build high-rises are actually used to create our little 2-inch needle. So the sewing machine needle is actually an engineered tool. Suzanne, do you want to guess how long it takes to make a needle?
20 hours. I have no idea.
It takes 12 weeks to make a needle. 12 weeks. And I was in Germany when they were still making specialty needles. Now they're batching hundreds of needles at a time, but it takes 12 weeks to make a needle. There are over 30 steps in the production of the needle. They start with German steel that comes in large coils, about the size that you would find on your door during the holidays. The wire is stretched, it's softened. In 1923, Smets was the first needle manufacturer to create a master die in order to create the eye of the needle. Thus, excess steel that oozes out from that die then is ground down, and the groove is milled. So there's over And then there's a high heat ovens and the freezer, everything is tempered. And along with the 30 steps to making a needle, there's over 70 quality control steps along the way. And a lot of those quality control steps are electronic. So it's really quite the production to create this little 2-inch piece of steel that we sew with, and we pay $1, a little bit more than $1 per needle for our machine. So keep that in mind. 12 weeks to make a needle that we can sew, 8 hours or so with. What was the original question? I don't even remember. Well, we'll just keep moving on here.
I posted 2 of Sandy's questions. I think Sandy had just put them up privately by accident, so she had 2 questions.
Okay, which needle type and size should be used for quilting on a home machine with cotton on top and back and cotton batting? Well, again, here's the thing. Okay, so I talked about 5 different needle types for piecing and for quilting, and I stand by this. You've got everybody's favorite, the universal. You've got the jeans, the top stitch, the quilting, and the Microtex. And it's really up to you to decide. There's no police that's going to say, oh, you must use only the Microtex or you must use only the quilting needle. Here's the deal. Our fabrics are all different. They have different dyes, different weaves, different looseness or tightness. You have to consider your thread also. And what about our machines? Our machines have personalities. And plus, when we sew or quilt, well, we each have our own kind of little technique. Maybe you kind of push or pull your fabric a little bit. So what works for you may not work for your sewing buddy. So you need to find out what works for you. I like to call it a dance. It's a dance between the needle, the thread, your fabric, and your machine and your technique, and you're the leader and you get to decide. As I mentioned before, my favorite needle type is an 80-12 for piecing and for quilting. But you know what? It doesn't work for all of my piecing projects. Sometimes just because of the fabric or the thread combo, it doesn't mesh so well. So then I would probably switch to a quilting needle. So with Smets, you've got choices. Okay, what about embroidery needles? Okay, yes, Smets has embroidery needles. The traditional embroidery needle, as we saw earlier at the beginning of class, has a red band for embroidery. Also, we saw that the embroidery needle has that extra wide eye, an extra wide eye. And that's because our machines are stitching at really high speeds. It used to be that machines would stitch, 600 stitches per minute. Now they're going 1,200 or more stitches per minute. So you need that larger eye in order for the thread to move through the eye easily and smoothly. So for machine embroidery, use the embroidery needle, or definitely the super nonstick. A great needle choice, again, because it has this nonstick surface and it has that extra large eye and a reinforced blade, so you get those nice clean stitches. Now there's one thing I want to point out on the super nonstick needle. If you're sewing on white or light fabrics, you really need to do a stitch out first with the super nonstick, because there might be just a little bit of the nonstick residue left on the needle. So you want to make sure you don't damage or soil your project with the super nonstick. It's not a huge problem, but every once in a while I stumble upon someone who's had a little residue left on the needle that has created a little problem on white or light fabric. So keep that in mind. I'm not aware of problems when you're sewing on medium to dark fabrics, but the super nonstick, lots of examples also of it working just fine on white or lights, but I just want to bring that to your attention. All right. Lisa's asking, can needles be recycled? Well, yes, they can. First of all, it's steel. The needle is steel, so that can be recycled. And then the little chip, the little plastic chip can be recycled also. However, you need to check with your community waste disposal service just to make sure that they accept this kind of plastic. Some communities do and some don't. So what some people like to do is they'll put their used needles into a prescription bottle and just collect them. I collect my used needles that are no longer sewing worthy in a little Altoid dish or tin. If you have slightly used needles, wow, what a great segue. If you have slightly used needles, there's a great way to organize them. Probably 5 or 6 years ago, we bought the Grab-It sewing tool company, and you're probably familiar with the Grab-It magnetic pin cushion that's in sewing rooms around the world. Well, one of the products is the Grab-It My Pad, and here's what it's going to look like when you go into Hip Stitch to order it. It's on a hang card. And let me just take this away. So this is actually from, I can show you here. This is a really thick felt. And on top of this, we've printed different needle types. And within each needle type, we have cells for needle sizes. So here's Universal, the most popular needle type, with a variety of needle sizes. So if you've got a slightly used needle, because in real life, don't we juggle projects? You start on one project and then you have to make an emergency gift. So you would put your slightly used needle in the proper category, if it's Universal, Microtex, Jersey, whatever, and then by needle size. There's also a flower head pin that comes with this, because if you have some of the older needles that do not have the color coding, you can use the little flower head pin here to identify the needle that's currently in your machine, so you don't have to remember. So I just slid this into Microtex size 80. It just goes naturally. Then if you've got twin needles or some other type of needle that's not actually on the grid here, you can just take a little Post-it note and make a note as to needle type and size and just slide it right there. I keep this standing right on my next to my lamp, next to my sewing machine. I know people that have multiple of these My Pads. They keep one at their sewing machine, their embroidery machine, and the serger, etc. So, whatever system works for you. The other Grab-It products that I'll just show you also, because I know Suzanne has these, is I think you're probably familiar with the Bobbin Saver. The Bobbin Saver, this is the original shape. It holds over 20 bobbins, and it doesn't matter if they're plastic or metal. It's a nice pliable plastic, so it just hugs your bobbins really nice. It's also available for the jumbo size of bobbins, and you can see that the channel for this jumbo is a little bit wider and deeper than the original Bobbin Saver. So from my travels then, people would come up to me and they say, well, Rhonda, I really like the Bobbin Saver, but it's not so efficient with space. Don't you have something that I can just slide into the drawer or stand up? So I came up with the Bobbin Saver Square, the Bobbin Saver Square. Now this holds over 60 bobbins, and it's that same pliable plastic. Doesn't matter if your bobbins are plastic or metal. They just the plastic here just hugs your bobbin. So you could sort your filled bobbins by, or even unfilled bobbins, by color or thread type, etc. So then the machine companies started coming out with larger bobbins. They started coming out with jumbo bobbins, and these jumbo bobbins measure at least 1 1/16 inch. So we needed a new Bobbin Saver square. So you can see that the channel here is much wider and deeper than the original Bobbin Saver square. So again, some of the sewing machine companies require a larger bobbin, a jumbo bobbin, and that's what this here is about. So with your Bobbin Saver square, you've got options for the regular size bobbin or the jumbo. And Suzanne at Hip Stitch carries these. All right. So what else do I need to tell you? Oh, okay. So I wanted to also mention, Suzanne, do you still have these, the ABC
Yes.
Pocket Guide? Okay.
Yes.
So if people come into your store, are you giving these away or is it with the purchase?
We're going to give them to anyone who has been in the class and places their needle order. Or if you come into the store and say you've been in the class. Yes, yeah.
Excellent, excellent. So someone at the very beginning of class asked for a PowerPoint of today's class, but you know what? This is better. Get the little ABC Pocket Guide. So where are you going to purchase your needles? You're going to go to Hip Stitch. You're either going to go to their website or you're going to go into the store, buy your needles and your fabrics, talk about their beautiful featherweight machines, etc., and also ask for the Smets ABC Pocket Guide. It retails for $4.95, so it's a nice little value. So what's inside the ABC Pocket Guide? Well, we've got that nice diagram about the parts of the needle, and more importantly, we've got this diagram about the eyes of the needle, so you don't have to remember that. Then you go to the beginning, and what do all those numbers mean on your little needle pack? How to read the needle pack. And do you remember what 130-705H means? I just have to review that. 130-705H is your needle system. It means that your needle has a flat shank and the scarf for 99% of all of our home sewing machines. And I also just want to point out about the needle system that now that long arm machines are so popular, and some of the sergers and larger embroidery machines, frequently they use a different needle system. That's why I want you to understand that needle system 130-705H is the needle system for home sewing machines. It's a flat shank needle with a scarf, because some of these other machines require a different needle system and may not work in your home sewing machine. So keep that in mind. So again, in the Smets ABC Pocket Guide, you've got how to read the needle package. And then we photographed all the different types of needles. We tell you what the color codes are, what sizes are available, what the special features are, etc. So lots of information here. But there's also a little reference at starting at the bottom of page 6, a little needle and fabric reference, what needle to use with what fabric. So you can just look at that. It goes quite a few pages throughout the little booklet here. It includes the chrome needles, so you can become familiar with those. And then, of course, our favorite needle chart. So now you don't have to memorize all those different colors and needle types. I'll point out one more thing, and that is towards the back, we've got the clues of the needle. And I love, love, love this photograph of the dull needle. This is a different needle than you saw in today's presentation. And you can clearly see how dull this needle is. And it's got all the different clues to changing your needle while you're sewing. So The Smets ABC Pocket Guide what is the foundation to today's class. You can get that from Suzanne from Hip Stitch. There's also a free app, Schmetz Needles, free app, either on Google Play or the iStore, but you still want the paper copy because it's cute and you can just set it right to the side of your sewing machine. All right. Let's see if there are any other questions. Any other questions?
The only one I saw that I don't think got answered, Lisa asked what needle to use, quilting with Minky on the back and cotton on the top.
Ooh, that's like a trick question.
She's trying to trick you.
Yeah. Well, I would start, because of the Minky, I would start with the stretch needle. I would start with the stretch 9014. And if I didn't like the stitch quality, then I would probably actually go to a universal needle. So you have a couple different needle types on hand. That stretch will probably work just fine, but sometimes you kind of have to explore, and don't be afraid, you know. Have a variety of needles handy. So as we kind of come wrap up things, if you're wondering if I really do sew, well, I did make my crushed velvet top here. The sun is shining here in the Chicago area, so I probably don't even need this, but I'm running out of cold weather, so I thought I better wear it today. If you're curious as to what type of sewing I like to do, you can visit my personal blog, which is sewmorestitches.com. I only post about 3 times a week. I'm not trying to be prolific or profound, but I do document my sewing projects. I might say I'm kind of in a little sewing slump right now. I've been working on a dress that I cut out at the beginning of the pandemic. And now that we've become so casual, I don't really think I need an empire waist dress. So I did decide recently, I think I'll just make it into a tunic because then I can wear leggings. So hopefully in the next, I'm going to say by March 15th, that's my goal. I'm going to get that tunic done so I can start wearing it. So you can click my blog, click 2020 sewing. You'll see I finished up a lot of UFOs, including a 17-year-old 1-inch Thangle with 1,000 pieces wall hanging. I also finished a 48 block sashiko quilt. All the stitches were hand stitched on the traditional indigo blue. And then all those blocks have just been sitting in my drawer waiting to go together. So I finally serged them all together, and now it's hanging in my sewing room. I love, love, love that sashiko, and I finished many other projects and started and finished some others. And yes, my magic unicorn is behind me. Isn't it fantastic? I love it. It truly is magic. That's a Ruby Star panel that my friend Amy quilted, and you can see some special pictures from the back side because the stitches glow in the dark. Anyway, so if there aren't any other questions, I want to say, Suzanne, thank you so much for inviting me here today. I truly do love to sew and quilt, and I love to help people remove the mystery about needles. So we covered a lot of information here today, but there are a lot of answers in the Smets ABC Pocket Guide. Suzanne has lots of answers. She carries a lot of the Smets needles and can help you out also.
Well, thank you. And I just want to add, I've seen now this class for the second time. I learned more. And my favorite line of yours and advice is how it's a dance, because you're absolutely right. I could be sewing with the same needle, the same thread, the same fabric as someone else, but on our 2 machines. Yeah, I love that there's no quilt police, and you find what's right for you.
Exactly. And you're the leader. So you get to make the change.
Yes. Thank you, Rhonda.
All right, so I encourage everyone to go visit Suzanne at Hip Stitch. I can hardly wait to come to your area and actually visit.
Yes.
I miss everyone, and I'd love to shop for fabrics in person and see you in the store.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
So, Smets, everyone.
Take care. Bye.